this evening commemorating and celebrating the life and achievements of Jill Lever. I'll only make a few words because there are people who knew her much better than I did, but oddly enough, my knowledge of Jill bracketed both ends of my career, because as a graduate student at the Courtauld, which in those days was next door to the Heinz collection, I would go with Howard Burns and we would look at Palladio drawings, among other things, under the watchful and sometimes astringent administration of Jill. And then it was a great delight to come here and find her well ensconced as a freelance researcher since 1996. And the amount of work that she not only created herself but also inspired others is really tremendous, and it'll be a living testimony to her impact on this collection, not only the work on George Dance, the Younger and Elder, but also her work on Soane, and really training half a dozen younger scholars who have carried on this great tradition. So I think we should all raise a glass in Jill's honor, and it's my pleasure to introduce Margaret Richardson, who's going to say a few words. Margaret.
Let's put my glass here.
Okay. On the melanite,
Get my few words. Well, I'm going to talk a lot about cataloguing, because Jill was very much about cataloguing. And now, first of all, we were in the RIBA building, the drawings collection. And I remember I struggled with the first catalogue, A. And it was not very good at all, not very good at all. But then we moved to 1971, we went to 21 Portman Square. Now that was quite different, because it was a wonderful place at all. John had a wonderful room, and Jill and I shared, we only had one job, so Jill did 3 days a week and I did 2. And so it was really, really a wonderful place where we could look at all the drawings and so forth. And that's when we really started to catalogue, getting people to catalogue. So the first one was 1972, B volume, and C to F volume. That was an amazing achievement, actually, because Jill mostly did all the editing, you see, but a lot of other people helped, and a lot of them are here today. Then 73, G to K and L to N, 76, O to R and S, 83, T to Z. So that was the sort of end. But it was an achievement in those years that she did. I think it was amazing, actually. And then the final one, of course, was the index, and the cumulative index, which, of course, is an absolute thing. Now, there was a team of people, particularly, that needed to be thanked. One was Joanna Hesseltine, who did a lot of the cataloguing, and George McCarty, here. And so people came in and offered to do things like that. But the other thing about the catalogues is that I think it's a wonderful book, you know, each one, because there are biographies of the architects, and then there are all the literature attached to it, and so on. So, you know, you can just lay it out in front of you when you're actually looking, and get all that information. And then Jill, in fact, got the S.A.H. Hitchcock medallion in 1989, and I was so pleased about that. It was really good. Now, I left in 1986 to come here. And Jill came here too on Monday mornings. And the first thing that she worked on was the dance catalogue, which is on the table over there. That's a wonderful catalogue too. And then she continued with Soane. What a job. But at that point, it was decided, not by her, that it would do on the computer. And I was so strongly against that, because the volumes were wonderful. They had pictures, they had all this stuff in it. But, you know, but I know that I'm just a little funny. But anyway, I think, and Sue would know, whether she finished the Soane catalogue.
No, we're about over halfway through. Considerably over halfway through.
About 2/3.
Yeah. Well, I wish she could have done that. But I'm sorry about the computer. Well, thank you.
Sorry. Yes. Thank you. I hate reading things, but I'm going to just be careful that I don't fall down first. So very many of us met in the RIBA Drawings Collection at Portman Square. It was just such a special place. A proper history of this heroic era in that Adam House, when the drawing collection was the center of architectural history in the English-speaking world, was begun by Margaret Richardson and Jill Lever. Jill was set to record history, even to buying the recording equipment for the interviews. Sadly, Jill's leadership in this endeavor will not now be done. Scholars in the drawing room, in the drawing collection, would work in the reading room, but they'd observe that the curators would get up periodically and go into the other part of the building, into the kitchen. As a reader in the collection way back in the early 1970s, I was pretty quickly allowed to go into the kitchen with others, which was terrific, and had the opportunity to meet just about anybody who was interested in English architecture at the time. It was an incubator for the study, because you would go into that kitchen and you met everybody, heard everything, both good and bad, what people were doing, gossip, etc. It was just absolutely wonderful. One day in the kitchen, Jill, who was elegant and a cute and cool curator, and sat at that desk very straight and worked all the time until she would go into the kitchen for a meal. But she approached me and asked if I might inhabit their newly constructed house in Notting Hill. Jill and her architect husband, Jeremy, had recently finished the house, which became really the core of their lives. For half a century, Jill and Jeremy and that house were an inseparable triumvirate. Jill wanted the house to be safe as she took the family on a holiday. They had a rare owl then, Emma remembers, Minimus, who was on the roof and to whom every morning I'd go up all those stairs and throw half a mouse. Jill thought that as an American I could deal with the house because it had something people didn't have in houses at the time, mixing taps. So I could handle it. But living in the house proved to be just wonderful for me. And I spent so many years there. We stayed in the house really for decades, loving the rooms, the artful arrangement of quilts, pots, spoons, cups, art, and those marvelous four-letter drawings that I still love. The guest room even had the music of the old underground line running above the surface as it traveled to the west. Jill was as tall and elegant, and I was heavy and enthusiastic. But we found we both had issues in common, and were forever frank. The masks dropped, and Jill and Jeremy were instantly supportive. I had a real problem once, and I contacted Jill and Jeremy, and they were the first people and the only people to offer instant and unadulterated support. I will never forget that. Sitting in Jill's kitchen became a pattern, which led to me creating 2 programs here, which were really due to Jill. Jill always knew who to contact, unusual places to take students, answers to student questions. They'd ask you something you wouldn't know, Jill knew. And then I would find, if I happened to be out late, I'd come back, and in the guest room bedroom, she'd have put books that would help me understand this on the side of the bed. So to me, this course survived 25 years now, and that was entirely due to Jill. What did we speak about? Values and judgments. We spent many years talking about healthcare issues. The NHS versus the no help at all in America plan. What limits were legitimate? Death squads. We spoke of politics, as all friends do. Education systems, acceptable behavior and its changes, and high-minded concepts currently evaporated from this earth. We've got a president, don't we? We spoke of exhibitions, books, where architecture and its history were going, the role of landscape, and sustainability. Lessons Jill and Jeremy learned when they traveled to exotic places that didn't have machines and kept cool by nature on walls came up in the conversation often, and sustainable methods of keeping cool seemed very important, and we learned a lot of lessons from Jill and Jeremy on that. And we spoke of food. Jill made jams, homemade granola. She ground the coffee every morning. Well, Jeremy actually did that. And she made dinners with things like scented geraniums in aspic and something that was a little beyond my comfort zone, pigeon. But the dishes were unusual and they were beautiful, and they made social gatherings absolutely magnificent. Indeed, food and beverage brought on one of my greatest failures in the first days I knew Jill. It was a brutally hot summer, and the RIBA collection even was roasting hot. I kept talking about American iced tea, which hadn't come here at the time, and I annoyed Jill so much that she finally gave me permission to make it. So I split out of the building after lunch and searched all of London. Getting a bag of ice cubes was not easy in those days. And then I came back, I got lemons, I came back, made tea the proper way, waited until it was cool, put it in with the ice cubes, served it with lemon, gave it to everybody who came into the kitchen. No one liked it. We went right back to hot tea. I think heartbreak took her away. Seeing Jeremy, who no longer knew her, being in the house so full of their life together every day, and then the last loss of Parsley, her final cat, was just too much to endure. Thank you.
Mosette, thank you very much. No. Jill and Mosette were very dear friends with one another. And Mosette has been, as you know, has come over from New York, and it's absolutely wonderful for this. And she's been our leader behind this evening, and I'd like to thank her for that.
Thank you, Neil.
I don't think I can follow the anecdotes after that. I feel like I'm following in Margaret's footsteps in speaking tonight, because I'm the second generation. I'm part of the second generation that came after John and Jill and Margaret. And I come within Jill's curatorship, and what I owe her and what I owe Margaret, I can't tell you. 86 I began, and it's only because I came to visit Margaret, who I barely knew. She took me to the kitchen here, didn't you? And said, there's this job going maybe over at the RIBA, and Jill took me on, and you know, and within a year or so, Jill was curator. And who went through Jill's hands? I did, and Tim did, and Finch is here, and who else was there? Tim? I've missed a few. And Eleanor.
Yeah.
And Eleanor was with us so well. So you talk about the catalogs, and that's one thing. I know Tim is going to speak later about our time together there in the collections, but the cataloging is something that Margaret mentions is so dear to her. And it became her life, and I think it became our lives as well. And so I'm part of that second generation now moves on with third and fourth generations through the power of those catalogs. And what you did, Margaret and John and the like, and George with the early catalogs were astounding. And then I think Jill transformed everything. She transformed it when she came to the dance catalog. Something new and perfect came out of that. The last conversation I had with Jill, we went out for dinner. We all often went out for dinner after she retired, which is how many years ago? 15 years ago now. And we used to talk about things like how do you look at umber when you look at a drawing? How can you tell a burnt from a raw umber? You know, and Jill had this kind of discipline about herself that she gave us. I always remember cataloguing meetings we'd have, and it would be things like, she would ask almost rhetorically, why are you saying pen and wash when you don't say pencil and graphite, for example? Oh gosh, I never thought about that, because one's the instrument and one's the medium, but you don't do it for the other. That was basics. That was just basics we began with. Jill was very free about the cataloguing. We often think it's a high discipline. She called it an art. And architectural history is an art, of course, as well. But she brought, I think, you all brought, and then I think Jill developed it, she brought a greater depth to it, a greater understanding. Her dance catalogue, she used to laugh, weighed how many kilos? 4 kilos or something like that. I don't think we're going to see the likes of those beautiful catalogues again. We're all now cataloging and working on a system that keeps us tightly in a control. The freedom is gone in a sense. When we look at Jill, we look at her role there. I'm so sorry that Jeremy can't be with us. Together they were a beautiful couple and so loving and so helpful. I send my love to the family and to all, Emma, and to all of you here, because all of you are her dear friends. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Tim Knox. Thank you very much, Neil. I first met Jill in 1989 when she interviewed me for the post of research assistant at the RIBA Drawings Collection. And much to my surprise, I was offered the job. And Jill used to always tell people afterwards this slightly disreputable story. The only reason I was interviewed is that on my CV it was stated that I was born in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And Jill thought that it would be really good to have an African... Imagine her disappointment when I turned up. Anyway, but it was that characteristic of Jill to encourage the young and the out of the ordinary. Sorry, Jill. But Jill gave me my first great break, and with Neil and Finch, she taught me to catalogue architectural drawings. A bit rusty now, but. In 1989, the Drawings Collection.
No, you were a disappointment. Jill said you were a disappointment. You never went on to catalogue.
In 1989, the Drawings Collection occupied, as Margaret has alluded to, this very elegant 18th century townhouse, 21 Portman Square. And Jill's office was the beautiful octagonal room, painted with arabesques, that had been Mrs. William Locke of Norbury's boudoir. It was hung with William Walcott watercolours before the Conservators made us put them away, and architects' busts and models. And Jill made an absolutely indelible impression, rather cold, rather imperious, but undeniably stylish, with her silver hair and her smock-like designer dresses in navy blue and charcoal grey. But a rather more playful, should we say kittenish, Jill would emerge at this daily ceremony of morning coffee and afternoon tea served in the diminutive kitchen at the back of the house. Staff and, as Mazette has said, carefully selected visitors were summoned by handbell to this oval tea table, which I'm very pleased to say it was John's own tea table and survives, I think, to this day at the RIBA.
So does the handbell.
Very good, very good. I hope, well, it's where the latest architectural gossip was extracted from their victims. And depending on the visitor, these occasions could get really uproarious, while other, less fortunate readers who were left in the silent study room, who was invigilating them, I wonder, wondered what caused the shrieks of helpless laughter emanating from the nether regions of the building. She also loved the elaborate practical jokes that we used to continually play upon one another, especially on Jane Prager, our lovely registrar, who had a notoriously short fuse. You could do horrible things to Jane, and she would always react. Now, otherwise, Jill generally kept to herself in her beautiful painted office, but she liked things kept looking just so in the reading rooms. And I've written here that she used to sort of snap at us if we left drawings out overnight, but no, snap wasn't the word, it was rather mellifluous, kind of, there was a drawl to her accent. And the other thing I always remember, a Jill sound was a slight hum as she went along the corridors. So you could tell when she was coming, you could look busy. And she was very encouraging. She encouraged me to rearrange and catalogue the models and the busts, for instance. But the other thing was our annual staff outing was invariably instructive. So one year we went to Harlow Newtown. We had a rather nice tea with Lady Gibbard. And another we went to inspect Erno Goldfinger's Balfron Tower and the Smithson's. Is it lamented? I think it's gone now, Neil, hasn't it? Robin Hood Gardens. And I think we had lunch in an eel parlour. She was, of course, equally stylish and perfectionist at home, as Mozetta said. Her husband, Jeremy, charming landscape architect with a wide smile and impeccable manners, was her perfect foil. And we used to always joke that Jill had him perfectly trained. Jeremy invariably did the driving. And when they arrived somewhere, he would get out, dash round the ground, open the passenger door for Jill like a professional chauffeur. Now, I saw a bit of Jill after she retired from the RIBA in 1995, and indeed, coming here to the Soane, she was cataloguing the Soane drawings, and her last great achievement, and Margaret, I'm sorry, I was the one who said we had to move on to computers. But everyone here, looking around, and everyone's incredibly well preserved, I must say. It's like architectural embalmment. But I think owes a great debt of gratitude to Jill, and she'll be hugely missed. And I'm now going to pass on to, where is he? Tom, who is one of Jill's chicks.
I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, I've been asked to say a few words about Jill as a teacher. I was lucky enough to be taught by Jill here at the Soane as a trainee drawings cataloguer between 2013 and 2015. I was one of 5 trainees to have been taken on by the Soane over the last, I think, 7 or 8 years, and I know that there's a couple of the other trainees are here this evening as well. And of course, one of countless others to have been taught by Jill over the years. So, like Tim, I first met Jill at an interview, my interview for the job here. I'd recently finished my Masters, was on the lookout for my first proper job, and it was just an enormous stroke of luck that I was taken on by the Soane. Little did I know then, of course, that I would be learning from the very best. Now, you might imagine that Jill was quite a strict and uncompromising teacher, and of course there was a proper way of doing things, and you had to learn that pretty quickly if you were going to get anywhere. She was also incredibly persistent, and talking about computers, I mean, we switched to a new cataloguing system just a few years ago, and she was absolutely determined that she was going to learn how to use the new one. She was so resolute in that. But actually, she was also very kind, very patient, and very generous with her time and with her knowledge, which of course was vast. Now, in my experience with Jill, lessons were rarely dictated. Solutions to problems were usually worked out in collaboration, and as well as offering her own advice, she was always prepared to be challenged and would often ask for my thoughts as well. It was always a pleasure to discuss the finer details of drawings with her. We would compare our different observations and work out the correct application of Soanean terms. In fact, I got the impression that teaching for Jill was really a two-way process. And for her, it was much about learning for herself as it was about passing on her knowledge to others. Above all, though, Jill was a great encourager. She was always willing to cast her eye over my work and always supportive of my development, whether it was in cataloguing or writing essays or giving talks or anything else for that matter. And there's one instance of this in particular that stands out for me, and it's when I was delivering my first conference paper at the Society of Architectural Historians Symposium back in 2016. My first conference paper, really. I'd already left the Soane by that point. I was working at Historic Royal Palaces. But even so, Jill made the effort to come to that conference to show her support. She just stayed for my paper and then she left. And it was a complete surprise to me as well. I had no idea that she was coming. But I just think that was so considerate of her. And actually, I was really touched by that. So Jill, of course, leaves an indelible mark on the world of architectural history. And in a way, I'd like to think that I and the other Soane trainees, who I understand have all gone on to successful careers, are a part, even if only a very small one, of that legacy. And I certainly know that I'm not alone in owing my career in a large part to Jill. And I think that me and everyone else who's ever been taught by Jill or influenced by her in any way really does owe her a great debt of gratitude.
I'm Charles Hind. I had the difficult task of filling Jill's shoes after she retired. She left in October '95, and I was appointed just before Christmas and started work, I think, in January '96. I'd first come across Jill when I had worked in the 1980s in Sotheby's. I was in charge of their design and architectural drawing sales. And she had done, in the run-up to her retirement, she had done a very comprehensive clean out of the files, which sometimes proved a bit annoying, but for me as her successor. But there was one memo that had survived regarding some drawings that, some cockerel diaries, which had come in to me at Sotheby's, and I'd been instructed to split the diaries up. This was the Iconographia Domestica, Cockerell's little record drawings with accompanying text describing various houses that he had visited and his opinions on these houses. And I did fight for the whole lot to be kept together, and I was overruled by my superiors. But I felt even then quite strongly that they should come to the RIBA, and there was in this memo, Jill goes on at length about the importance of raising money to buy these, and saying that she had found working with Charles Hind, who appears to be amongst the saints, was trying to keep them trying as far as possible to be helpful and giving them a complete set of free photographs and such like, which one wasn't supposed to do. And she obviously remembered me kindly because when I left Sotheby's, I was made redundant in the last big recession in the early 90s, and she funneled my way various little jobs valuing, for example, Dennis Lasdon's archive, which ultimately, because we subsequently took the Lasdon archive on loan, and it's now one of our major research archives. And the Christopher Lennox Boyd collection of architectural prints, which the RIBA bought and which she fundraised a very considerable amount of money, I think £100,000, to acquire. When it was announced that I was going to succeed her, she invited me out to lunch. And as I didn't know Jill very well, we had a slightly chilly lunch. She was obviously trying to find out more about me. And towards the end, she said, well, people are asking me what you're going to be like. And I'm just saying, he could be bad, he could be terrible. I really don't know. And I suppose when about 5 years later, we were at an ICAM, and we were out having a drink together, she said, you know, you turned out all right in the end. Which I suppose I should put as a reference of some sort. She had some suspicions as to how her successor was going to turn out. And she had timetabled for herself an exhibition, not knowing who was going to succeed her, in the Heinz Gallery on architectural prints. And so for my first 6 months or so, she was regularly in the drawings collection, sort of half trying to be sort of discreetly background, getting on with the job. And every now and again, I would, if I really couldn't work something out or find something, I'd say, can you tell me about this, that, or the other? And she'd say, well, if you go into my office, I mean your office. You'll find it, blah, blah, blah. And she had left her files and such like in apple pie order. I mean, she really was the cataloguer in her extended to, I think, all aspects of her sort of paper life. She was a very important figure which nobody mentioned, in the International Confederation of Architectural Museums, which John had been one of the co-founders of back in, I think, 1979. And she sat on the board and was, I think, found by our international colleagues an invaluable support over the years. And it's only the last few years that she'd given up going to the conference, every biennial conference. And I think she was much missed from that. I think that's really all that one can say, except that this is probably a great this is certainly a great gathering of the drawings collections past, as well as bringing together both the RIBA and the Soane. She wasn't somebody who was just going to retire and sort of settle down. And I think developing almost this sort of new career in retirement here at the Soane with capacity for teaching and so on is quite extraordinary. And I think that to have so many of you, I think I was told there were 63 acceptances, and it was a vast majority of those who were invited who were able to come tonight, is a great tribute to the affection and respect that we held Jill in. So thank you, Jill.